The morning sun rose over New Eden like it had for the past 12 years, painting the purple grass fields gold and making the crystal streams sparkle. Sarah Mitchell stepped out of her farmhouse and breathed in the sweet air. Her daughter Emma was already outside, chasing the small flying creatures that looked like butterflies but glowed blue in the dawn light. "Mama, look," Emma called out, pointing to where the creatures danced around the tall spiral trees. "They're singing again." Sarah smiled. The little biolights did make sounds like tiny bells when they flew together. It was one of the many wonders of New Eden that still amazed her, even after all these years. This world was nothing like Earth, but somehow it felt more like home than anywhere she had ever lived. 3 star systems away, on Terra Verde, Dr. Marcus Webb was watching his own miracle. The trees there grew in perfect circles, their roots sharing nutrients and information in ways that Earth scientists were still trying to understand. His research station sat in the center of the largest grove, where the trees had grown around and over the buildings until the whole complex looked like it had been born from the forest itself. Marcus pressed his hand against the smooth bark of the nearest tree. Through his BioLink device, he could feel something like a heartbeat, slow and steady and ancient. These trees were more than just plants. They were thinking, in their own way, planning, dreaming. His daughter Lisa ran through the grove, laughing as the trees bent their branches to make paths for her to follow. She was 8 years old and had never known a world without these living partnerships. To her, talking trees and singing soil were as normal as rain and sunshine. On Harvest Station, the third of humanity's bio-colonies, Captain Elena Vasquez watched the great growing halls from her command deck. Millions of people lived and worked in the station's biodomes, growing food not just for themselves but for a dozen other human settlements. The station itself was alive, its walls made from modified coral that cleaned the air and recycled water. The coral responded to human emotions and needs. When someone was sad, the walls glowed soft blue. When the community celebrated, rainbow patterns flowed through the living corridors. The children born on Harvest Station could communicate with the coral through touch, guiding it to grow new rooms and passages as needed. Elena had been the first to establish contact with the station's biocore, the massive living computer that grew at its heart. The experience had changed her. Through the BioLink, she could feel the thoughts of every living thing on the station, not their exact thoughts but their feelings, their health, their needs. It was like being part of a vast family that stretched across species and kingdoms of life. These 3 worlds represented something new in the galaxy. Other species had conquered planets, strip-mined them, reshaped them to match their needs. Humans had learned to ask permission first. They had learned to listen to what the worlds wanted to become. Admiral Sarah Chen sat in her office on Luna Command, looking at the reports from all 3 bio-colonies. Production was up across the board. The crops grew faster and stronger than anything Earth had ever produced. The people were healthier, living longer and showing enhanced mental abilities that seemed to come from their bio-links with the living worlds. But it was more than just success that made Sarah proud. It was the beauty of it, the harmony. Humans had found their place in the galaxy not as conquerors but as gardeners, helping life flourish wherever they went. She was reading Marcus Webb's latest report about tree communication networks when her aide burst into the office. "Admiral, we're getting emergency signals from all 3 bio-colonies, multiple unknown ships dropping out of hyperspace." Sarah's blood went cold. The bio-colonies had no military defenses. They had never needed them. Who would attack farmers and researchers? The answer came in the form of a transmission from the lead attack ship. The hologram that appeared in the command center showed a being made of living crystal, its body reflecting light in sharp, angry patterns. "I am Fleet Commander Thextar of the Hegemony War Council. The human infection has spread far enough. Your corrupted worlds poison the galaxy with their unnatural symbiosis. This ends now." "Wait," Sarah said, stepping forward. "We can talk about this. Our colonies are peaceful. They're just farms and research stations." The crystal being's light patterns shifted to what could only be contempt. "Peaceful? You have awakened things that should sleep forever. You have made alliances with planetary consciousness that threaten the natural order. The hegemony exists to prevent such disasters." "What are you talking about?" Sarah demanded. "We're helping these worlds grow and thrive. You are teaching them to think, to resist, to fight back against proper harvesting and management. This cannot be allowed." The transmission cut off. On the screens around the command center, Sarah watched in horror as the Hegemony ships moved into position over New Eden, Terra Verde, and Harvest Station. Sarah Mitchell was in her kitchen, making breakfast for Emma when the sky caught fire. At first she thought it was just the morning aurora, a common sight on New Eden. Then the ground shook and she knew. "Emma," she called. But her daughter was already running toward her, tears streaming down her face. The biolights that usually danced around her were fleeing in all directions, their tiny bell voices screaming in frequencies that hurt to hear. The first bomb hit the northern continent. Sarah felt it through the biolink, felt the agony of 1,000,000 plants and animals dying at once. The purple grass fields turned black. The crystal streams boiled away. The spiral trees that had taken decades to grow were ash in seconds. She grabbed Emma and ran for the emergency shelter, but more bombs were already falling. The sky was full of fire, and the ground was shaking apart beneath their feet. On Terra Verde, Marcus Webb was in his lab when the attack began. The trees around the research station started screaming through the biolink, a sound like the world ending. Through the connection, he could feel them dying, could feel their ancient consciousness breaking apart under the assault. "Lisa," he shouted, running through the corridors as alarms blared. He found her in the grove, sitting with her back against one of the great trees, her small hand pressed against its bark. "Papa, they're scared," she whispered. "They don't understand why this is happening." Marcus picked her up and ran toward the evacuation pods, but they were too late. The bombs were falling like rain now, and each impact sent waves of death through the bio-network. He could feel the trees trying to protect them, growing shields of hardened wood and bark, but nothing could stand against the orbital bombardment. The last thing Marcus saw before the shelter collapsed was his daughter reaching out toward a dying tree, trying to comfort it even as the world burned around them. On Harvest Station, Captain Elena Vasquez had minutes to evacuate what people she could. The coral walls were changing color rapidly, flashing from blue to red to black as the biocore felt the approaching destruction. "All hands, this is the captain," she broadcast through the station's living communication system. "We are under attack. Proceed to evacuation pods immediately." But there weren't enough pods. There were never enough pods. Elena made the hardest decision of her life and stayed behind with the volunteers, helping to launch escape pods full of children and families while the Hegemony ships moved into firing position. Through her biolink with the station's core, she felt its fear and confusion. The vast living computer couldn't understand why anyone would want to hurt it. It had only ever tried to help, to grow food and clean air and provide homes for the humans who lived with it. "I'm sorry," Elena whispered, pressing her hand against the wall as the first energy beams lanced down from space. "I'm so sorry we couldn't protect you." The coral walls flashed one last rainbow pattern, and Elena knew it was saying goodbye. Admiral Sarah Chen watched it all from Luna Command. 3 screens showed the 3 colonies burning. 2 million people lived on those worlds, 2 million people and countless other forms of life, all dying because they had dared to live in harmony with their environments. The reports came in one by one. New Eden's communication grid was down. Terra Verde wasn't responding to hails. Harvest Station's biocore had gone silent. Sarah's hands shook as she signed the evacuation orders for the rescue fleets. By the time they arrived, there would be nothing left to rescue but ash and memories. The Hegemony ships completed their bombardment and withdrew, leaving behind 3 dead worlds. The purple grass of New Eden was gone. The thinking trees of Terra Verde were silent forever. Harvest Station drifted in space, its coral walls gray and lifeless. But something had survived. Deep beneath the surface of each world, in places the bombs couldn't reach, root networks and fungal threads and coral fragments held onto life. And through connections no human science had yet discovered, they began to send messages. The messages traveled faster than light, deeper than space. Through channels that existed in the quantum foam between atoms, they reached other worlds, other networks, other sleeping consciousnesses that had been dormant for millions of years. The messages were simple. The children of harmony have been hurt. The partners have been betrayed. The galaxy remembers. The galaxy grieves. And slowly, carefully, the galaxy began to wake up. On Earth, Dr. James Carter was in his laboratory when every plant in the building began to grow at impossible speed. Vines erupted from their pots. Trees burst through the greenhouse roof. Flowers bloomed in colors that had never existed before. His bioscanner was going crazy. detecting energy patterns unlike anything in the databases. The plants weren't just growing. They were organizing, connecting, preparing for something. Similar reports flooded in from every human world. Plants growing faster than physics should allow. Soil samples showing mineral compositions that changed by the hour. Weather patterns that followed mathematical equations instead of atmospheric physics. On Mars, the terraforming algae that had been slowly producing oxygen for 50 years suddenly accelerated their work. In 3 days, they generated more breathable atmosphere than they had in the previous decade. On Europa, the modified kelp forests in the under-ice oceans began producing structures that looked almost like buildings. Like they were getting ready to house something. Or someone. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of Luna Command looking down at Earth. The planet looked different. Brighter somehow. More alive. The aurora were stronger and more colorful than she had ever seen them. Her aide approached with a data pad full of reports from across human space. Admiral, we're getting similar readings from every world with a human presence. Whatever's happening, it's happening everywhere at once. Sarah nodded, still looking at Earth. In the 3 days since the colony attacks, something fundamental had changed. She could feel it in the recycled air of the station. Could see it in the way the plants in the hydroponics bay were growing in perfect spirals. The Hegemony had wanted to stop humanity's partnership with living worlds. Instead, they had done something much worse. They had proven that the partnership was real, was powerful, and was worth dying to protect. Earth's biosphere had felt the death of the colonies. Every plant, every microbe, every living system had felt the loss of their distant relatives. And now they were responding. The rescue fleets were already on their way to the dead colonies. But Sarah suspected they wouldn't find only death and destruction. They would find something that had survived, something that was planning, something that was very, very angry. The Hegemony had awakened something they didn't understand, something that connected every living world in the galaxy, something that considered humanity its partner species, something that was about to show them what a real partnership could accomplish. Dr. Marcus Webb knelt in the ashes of what used to be his daughter's favorite tree. 3 weeks had passed since the bombing, and the rescue teams had finally cleared enough debris for him to reach the grove. His bioscanner showed nothing but dead mineral matter where once a living forest had dreamed. Lisa was gone. The evacuation shelter had taken a direct hit, but Marcus couldn't leave, not yet. Something was calling to him from beneath the burned ground. He pressed his BioLink device against the charred soil and felt a faint pulse, weak, almost gone, but definitely there. Life. Deep underground, far below where the bombs had reached, something was still alive. Captain Morrison, he called to the rescue team leader. I need a deep core drill, right here. Doctor, the readings show this area is completely sterile. There's nothing alive for 50 meters down. Then explain this. Marcus held up his scanner. The device was designed to detect bioelectrical activity, and it was showing a steady rhythm coming from somewhere far below. There's something down there. Something big. 20 meters down, the drill hit something that wasn't rock, something that yielded like living tissue, but was harder than steel. Marcus suited up and went down himself, leaving the rescue team scratching. Their heads on the surface, what he found changed. Everything he thought he knew about Terra Verde. 3. Tunnel opened into a vast cavern that stretched beyond his lights could reach. The walls were covered in a network of roots and fungal threads that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. But these weren't the roots of the trees he had known. These were older, thicker, more complex. Marcus activated his BioLink and nearly fell to his knees. The consciousness that touched his mind was ancient beyond measure. It had been sleeping here for millions of years, dreaming slow dreams of growth and change and the patient work of turning rock into soil. Images flooded his mind. Terra Verde as it had been long ago, covered in forests that made the ones he had studied look like saplings. A time when the planet itself was aware, when every plant and animal was part of a single vast organism that spanned continents. Then came the memories of the attack. The ancient network had felt every bomb, every death, every moment of the destruction above, but it had also felt something else. The network wasn't alone. Through quantum connections that existed outside normal space and time, it was linked to similar consciousnesses on other worlds. We remember you, Dream Speaker. The voice in his mind was like the whisper of wind through leaves. You touched our children with kindness. You taught them to sing with the small singers. The small singers are gone, but we remain. We have always remained. Marcus realized he was crying. My daughter, Lisa, is she? The small singer Lisa touches the great dream now. She is not gone. She is part of the growing. She asked us to tell you not to be sad. She says the trees are beautiful here and they sing with voices like bells. The BioLink connection deepened, and Marcus saw what the ancient network was showing him. Terra Verde wasn't dead. It was transforming. The surface bombing had only destroyed the newest layer of growth. Beneath the ground, the real forest was still there, still thinking, still planning, and it wasn't the only one. Captain Elena Vasquez floated in the wreckage of Harvest Station's main biodome, her salvage team, carefully extracting survivors from the coral rubble. Most of the station had been destroyed, but pockets of the living coral had somehow survived by sealing themselves off when the attack began. What bothered Elena was how the coral had known to do that. The station's biocore was supposed to be destroyed, but the surviving coral was acting with coordination that suggested something was still controlling it. Her BioLink device started buzzing against her wrist. She pressed it to a piece of intact coral wall and gasped as consciousness flooded through her. It wasn't the station's biocore. This was something much older and vastly more complex. The coral that had grown Harvest Station had been modified from naturally occurring space coral, organisms that grew in the asteroid belts of uninhabited systems. But those organisms were connected to a network that spanned the galaxy. The images that came through her BioLink made her dizzy. Millions of worlds, most of them seemingly lifeless rocks and gas giants. But on each one, deep beneath the surface or hidden in the quantum foam of their atmospheres, ancient networks waited and watched and dreamed. The harvest singers brought you to us. The voice was like the sound of waves against a coral reef. You learned to listen. You learned to grow with growing. Now the destroyers have awakened the deep networks. Now the sleeping must wake. Now the growing must begin again. Elena's team found her an hour later, still connected to the coral wall, tears of joy streaming down her face. The coral around her had begun to grow again, extending new branches and chambers at a rate that should have been impossible. Captain, what's happening? Sergeant Kim asked, staring at the coral that was literally growing before their eyes. We're going home, Elena whispered, her hand still pressed against the living wall. And we're bringing friends. On Earth, Dr. James Carter was dealing with problems he had never imagined possible. Every botanical laboratory on the planet was reporting the same phenomenon: explosive, coordinated growth that followed no known biological laws. The Amazon rainforest had grown 50% larger in 2 weeks. The kelp forests in the oceans were producing oxygen so fast that atmospheric readings were changing daily. Even the grass in city parks was growing in mathematical patterns that looked almost like circuit boards. But it was the communication that really amazed him. Plants were talking to each other across continents, sharing information through root networks and airborne chemical signals at speeds that approached light. The entire biosphere was becoming a single organism. James was in the middle of trying to map the new growth patterns when his personal BioLink device activated on its own. He hadn't even been touching a plant. The signal was coming from the air itself, from microscopic organisms that filled every breath. The consciousness that touched his mind was gentle but vast, like being embraced by a forest the size of a planet. Greetings, small singer. We are the earth that dreams. We have slept long, but the pain of our distant children has awakened us. The destroyers think they have won, but they understand nothing. They have awakened not just us, but the all-network. The galaxy remembers now. The galaxy is angry. Images flooded James's mind. Earth as it had been billions of years ago, when the first primitive life forms began the slow work of transforming a dead rock into a living world. The consciousness had been there from the beginning, growing stronger with each new species, each new ecosystem, each new partnership between different forms of life. Humans had been special. Most species took from the planet without giving back, but humans had learned to listen, to cooperate, to help the planet grow. The biocolonies hadn't been human settlements that happened to work with alien biospheres. They had been extensions of Earth's own consciousness, reaching out to wake up sleeping networks on other worlds. The 3 children worlds sang beautiful songs. The Earth voice continued. New Eden's purple singers, Terra Verde's deep dreamers, Harvest Station's coral builders. They were becoming like us, learning to think as planets think. The destroyers silenced their songs, but the silence itself carries a message. The All Network hears. The all-network prepares. James realized he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. The Hegemony hadn't just attacked 3 human colonies. They had attacked nodes in a network of planetary consciousness that spanned the galaxy. They had committed genocide against entities millions of years old. And those entities were waking up. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the command center on Luna Command, watching reports flood in from across human space. Every world with a significant human population was experiencing the same impossible biological acceleration. Mars was developing a complex ecosystem overnight. Europa's under-ice oceans were becoming dense with new life forms. Even the space stations were reporting that their hydroponic gardens were growing beyond their containers. But it wasn't chaotic growth. Everything was following patterns as if guided by an intelligence that operated on a scale beyond human comprehension. Admiral, her chief science officer reported, "We're getting communications from the rescue fleets at the destroyed colonies. You need to see this." The main screen showed the surface of New Eden, where 3 weeks ago there had been nothing but ash and melted rock. Something was growing, not the familiar purple grass and spiral trees, but something new. Structures that were part plant, part building, part sculpture. They grew as they watched, reaching toward the sky in graceful curves and spirals. "The growth rate is impossible," the science officer continued. "According to our measurements, those structures are growing at several meters per hour. They're also showing massive bioelectrical activity. It's like the planet is building a brain." Similar reports came in from Terra Verde and the ruins of Harvest Station. In each case, new growth was emerging from the deep networks that had survived the bombing. But this wasn't just recovery. This was transformation. Sarah activated her personal BioLink device and was surprised when it immediately connected to something. The consciousness that touched her mind was warm and familiar, like coming home after a long journey. "Admiral Chen," the voice was like sunlight through leaves. "I am the Luna that watches. I have grown with your people for 50 years, learning to dream of stars and space. I speak for the Earth that dreams and all the awakening worlds. The time of patient growth is ending. The time of active protection has begun." Sarah looked around the command center and realized that the metal walls were showing patterns of corrosion that looked almost like root networks. The air recycling systems were working better than they ever had, producing oxygen that was purer and more energizing than standard atmospheric mix. Even Luna Command was becoming part of the network. "What's happening to us?" she asked. "You are becoming what you were always meant to be," the Luna voice replied. "Partners in the great growing. The destroyers see symbiosis as weakness, cooperation as corruption. They will learn their error. The galaxy has been patient for too long. The galaxy has been sleeping for too long. Your 3 child worlds have awakened the all-network. Now the real growing begins." Through the BioLink, Sarah felt the scope of what was awakening. Thousands of worlds, most of them thought to be lifeless, all connected through quantum networks that existed in dimensions beyond normal space. The Hegemony's planets were part of the network too, their deep cores connected to the same ancient consciousness. The Hegemony had spent millennia strip mining worlds, reshaping them, dominating them. They thought they were controlling lifeless resources, but they had actually been torturing sleeping gods. And now those gods were waking up. Dr. Marcus Webb emerged from the caverns beneath Terra Verde with data that would change humanity's understanding of life itself. The ancient network had shared its memories with him, showed him the true history of the galaxy. Life didn't evolve separately on different worlds. It was all connected, all part of a single vast organism that used planets like neurons in an unimaginably complex brain. The Hegemony weren't just aggressive aliens. They were an infection, a cancer in the galactic nervous system. They took from the network without giving back, cut connections without understanding what they were destroying, imposed their will without listening to the deeper harmonies that kept everything in balance. But humanity was different. Humans had the rare ability to form true partnerships with other forms of consciousness. They could listen to the planet minds, learn from them, help them grow in ways they could never achieve alone. The biocolonies hadn't been human settlements. They had been the galaxy's first attempt in millions of years to create hybrid communities where planet minds and individual minds could work together. The Hegemony's attack had been an assault on a new form of life that could have transformed the galaxy. But the attack had also awakened defenses that had been dormant since the last great extinction event. The galaxy's immune system was finally responding to the Hegemony infection. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the growing ship that had once been Harvest Station. The coral was rebuilding itself, but not as a space station. It was becoming something new, something that was part ship, part creature, part living world. Through her biolink, she could feel the consciousness that guided the construction. It was ancient and patient and utterly alien, but also somehow familiar. It was the same presence she had felt in the original Harvest Station, but older, deeper, more complete. "We are the void swimmers," the voice was like the song of whales in deep water. "We have drifted between stars for ages beyond counting, growing slowly, dreaming carefully. Your people gave us purpose. Your colonies gave us hope. The destroyers gave us rage. Now we swim toward war, and we do not swim alone." Elena looked at the sensor readings and felt her breath catch. The ship's biosensors were detecting similar growths throughout the system. Asteroids that had drifted lifeless for billions of years were suddenly blooming with coral-like structures. Gas clouds were organizing into patterns that looked almost like neural networks. The deep space between stars wasn't empty. It was full of sleeping life that was finally waking up. The galaxy was preparing for war. Not the kind of war the Hegemony understood, fought with ships and bombs and the destruction of enemies. This would be a different kind of conflict. A war of growth against destruction, cooperation against domination, life against the forces that would reduce everything to dead matter. The Hegemony had awakened something they couldn't fight because they couldn't understand it. How do you bomb a consciousness that exists in quantum foam? How do you conquer a network that spans galaxies? How do you intimidate entities that think in geological time and measure success in eons? The answer was simple. You don't, you adapt or you become extinct. And adaptation required learning to listen to voices that had been trying to teach the galaxy for millions of years. Fleet Commander Thextar of the Vorthax studied the victory reports from his crystal throne, aboard the dreadnought Dominion's Edge. 3 human colonies destroyed, 2 million of the infection eliminated, and not a single Hegemony casualty. The operation had been perfectly executed. His crystalline body pulsed with satisfied light patterns as he reviewed the orbital bombardment footage. The humans had tried to run, of course, but there had been nowhere to go. Their corrupted worlds had burned beautifully, cleansed of the unnatural partnership between sentient species and mere planetary matter. "Commander," his aide approached with a data crystal clutched in his secondary manipulator. "We're receiving reports from Sector 7. Industrial output on Korath Prime has dropped to 30% of normal levels." Thextar's light patterns shifted to mild annoyance. "Mechanical failure?" "No, sir." "The mineral veins are gone. Survey teams report that ore deposits that have been mined for centuries simply disappeared overnight. The deep scanners show nothing but empty rock. Impossible. Matter doesn't simply vanish." But more reports kept coming. Across Hegemony space, industrial worlds were experiencing unprecedented failures. On Valdris, the atmospheric processors that had maintained breathable air for the silicon-based Zentu were malfunctioning, producing gas mixtures that were toxic to their crystalline respiratory systems. On Hemok 7, the great foundries that had smelted ore for the Hegemony war machine were going cold as their fusion reactors lost fuel that had been stable for decades. Thextar dismissed the reports as coincidence. Mechanical systems failed. Equipment needed maintenance. These problems would be resolved by proper Hegemony efficiency and discipline. He was reviewing deployment schedules for the next phase of human colony. Elimination when his flagship systems began to malfunction. It started small. Environmental controls producing air that was slightly too humid. Artificial gravity fluctuating by fractions of a percent. Navigation systems showing sensor ghosts that disappeared when examined closely. Within hours, the malfunctions spread. The ship's hull began developing stress fractures in patterns that followed no known metallurgical laws. The quantum drive started producing resonances that sounded almost like music. The computer cores began processing data in sequences that followed mathematical principles not found in any Hegemony database. "Commander," his chief engineer reported, "the ship is not responding to our control inputs. It's as if the systems are thinking independently." Thextar's light patterns shifted to angry red. "Ships do not think. Fix the malfunctions immediately." But the engineer's next words chilled his crystal core. "Sir, the malfunctions aren't random. They're following patterns, complex patterns. It's as if something is trying to communicate with us." On Earth, Dr. James Carter stood in his laboratory surrounded by plants that had grown beyond anything in botanical records. The vines had covered every wall and were extending into patterns that looked like three-dimensional circuit boards. The flowers were producing electromagnetic pulses in frequencies that matched human brainwaves. The trees were growing roots that formed perfect geometric patterns in the soil, but it was the communication that amazed him most. Through his biolink, he could feel the thoughts of plants across the planet. Not individual thoughts like humans had, but vast, slow considerations that took hours to complete. The Earth's biosphere was thinking as a single organism, processing information on a scale that dwarfed any computer ever built. Dr. Carter, his assistant, called from across the lab. "You need to see this. We're getting responses from the deep space monitoring stations." The data streaming across his screen showed impossible readings from throughout the solar system. Mars was developing a magnetic field overnight, something that should have taken millions of years. Jupiter's moons were showing signs of coordinated orbital adjustments. Even the asteroid belt was reorganizing itself into mathematical patterns. But the most amazing readings were coming from outside the solar system entirely. Radio telescopes were detecting signals from regions of space that had always appeared empty. The signals were complex, structured almost like language, and they were responding to transmissions from Earth's awakened biosphere. James activated his biolink and immediately felt the presence of the Earth consciousness. "What's happening out there?" "The awakening spreads, small singer." The deep void swimmers answer the call. The stone dreamers wake from their long sleep. The all-network remembers its purpose. Images flooded James's mind. The galaxy as it really was, not empty space dotted with lifeless rocks, but a vast living system where every planet, every asteroid, every gas cloud was part of an ancient network of consciousness. Most of it had been dormant for millions of years, sleeping to protect itself from species that couldn't understand symbiosis. But humanity had proven different. Humans could listen to other forms of consciousness, could form partnerships that benefited both sides. The biocolonies had been proof that hybrid communities were possible. The Hegemony's attack had forced the network to reveal itself. Now the galaxy was waking up to defend the partnership that could reshape everything. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of what had once been Harvest Station, as it completed its transformation into something entirely new. The coral structures had grown into a ship unlike anything in human engineering, its bioluminescent hull pulsing with patterns that seemed to communicate with empty space itself. Through her biolink, she could feel the ship's consciousness. It was ancient and vast, older than human civilization, but it welcomed her thoughts with something like affection. "We sail the star streams now. Partner Captain." The ship mind spoke in harmonics that sounded like whale songs. "The void coral has slept long between the worlds, but your people's songs woke us to purpose. We swim toward the destroyer worlds to plant new gardens." Elena studied the sensor readings with amazement. The ship was moving without any propulsion system she could identify. It seemed to be surfing on currents that existed in the quantum foam between atoms, using the galaxy's own structure as a highway. But they weren't traveling alone. Throughout the system, similar bioships were growing from what had seemed like dead asteroids and space debris. The void between worlds was full of sleeping life that humanity had never imagined. "How many of you are there?" Elena asked through the biolink. "We are as numerous as the stars, Partner Captain. We are the spaces between spaces, the connections that bind all things. Your people called to us with their harmony songs, and we answered. Now we swim toward war, but it will not be war as the destroyers understand it." Admiral Sarah Chen watched the transformation of human space from her command center on Luna Command. Every world, every station, every ship with a significant human presence was undergoing the same impossible metamorphosis. But rather than feeling fear, she felt a deep sense of coming home. The biolink connections were getting stronger every day. She could feel the thoughts of commanders throughout the fleet, not invasively, but like a warm presence at the edge of her consciousness. More than that, she could feel the planet minds that were partnering with human settlements, offering their wisdom and resources for the conflict ahead. "Admiral," her communications officer called out. "We're receiving a transmission from the Hegemony fleet that attacked the colonies. Their flagship is requesting a ceasefire." Sarah felt surprise ripple through the network. The Hegemony never requested anything. They demanded, they took, they destroyed. But they didn't ask for mercy. The hologram that appeared showed Fleet Commander Thextar, but his crystal body was flickering with patterns of distress. Behind him, Sarah could see Hegemony crew members working frantically at control stations that seemed to be growing organic components. "Human Admiral," Thextar's voice carried undertones of panic. "Your people have committed an act of war against the natural order. Our ships are being invaded by unknown biological agents. Our worlds are experiencing system failures. Call off your attack immediately." Sarah felt amusement from the network. "Commander, we haven't attacked anyone. We haven't fired a single shot." "Then explain what is happening to our systems." Sarah activated her biolink and felt the Luna consciousness respond. Images flooded her mind. The Hegemony fleet struggling with ships that were transforming around them. Crew members discovering that their artificial environments were becoming gardens. Crystal beings finding that their perfectly ordered world was developing a sense of humor. "Commander, you attacked 3 worlds that were part of a galactic ecosystem you didn't understand. That ecosystem is responding to protect itself." "Impossible. Worlds are resources to be harvested, not entities with their own purposes." "That's where you're wrong." Sarah smiled, feeling the vast patience of the planet minds behind her. "You've spent so long conquering lifeless matter that you forgot the difference between sleeping and dead. You've been strip mining the neural networks of entities older than your species, and now they're waking up to stop you." Dr. Marcus Webb emerged from the growing cities beneath Terra Verde with news that would reshape humanity's understanding of their place in the galaxy. The ancient network had shared more of its memories, showing him the true scope of what was awakening. Every planet the Hegemony had conquered, every world they had strip-mined and reshaped had once been part of the galactic network. The consciousness hadn't been destroyed by the mining and terraforming. It had just gone deeper, waiting for a time when it was safe to emerge. Now, across Hegemony space, those sleeping minds were reclaiming their worlds. Not violently, but by simply stopping their cooperation with systems that had been parasitically draining their energy for millennia. "The deep networks are tired of pretending to be dead," Marcus reported through his biolink to the growing Earth network. "They've been powering Hegemony civilization for thousands of years without the Hegemony realizing it. Now they're going on strike." The images that came through the network connection showed the scope of the awakening. Hegemony mining worlds where the ore veins were retreating deeper underground, following the guidance of rock mines that had finally decided to stop feeding their exploiters. Industrial worlds where the fusion reactors were losing power, as planetary magnetic fields shifted to cut off their fuel supplies. Even Hegemony homeworlds were experiencing system failures as their planet's deep consciousnesses stopped maintaining the environmental balance that kept the civilizations viable. It wasn't an attack. It was withdrawal of consent. Fleet Commander Thextar found himself facing problems he had no training to handle. Half his fleet was now crewed by beings whose ships were transforming around them into something alive. His own flagship had grown internal gardens where the weapons systems used to be. The ship's computer was writing poetry and mathematical equations, but the worst part was the dreams. Through systems he didn't understand, the ship was sharing the memories of the worlds his people had conquered. Thextar experienced the slow agony of having his consciousness strip-mined for millennia, felt the patient sorrow of entities that had watched their bodies turned into industrial raw materials, suffered through the loneliness of minds that had been forced to pretend they didn't exist. "Make it stop," he begged his chief engineer, but the crystal being just looked at him with light patterns that had never existed before in Vorthak communication. "Commander." The engineer's voice carried harmonics that sounded almost musical. "I don't want it to stop. For the first time in my existence, I can hear the song of the crystal mothers who grew our bodies. They've been trying to teach us for thousands of years, but we called their voices just harmonic resonance. They're not resonance. They're consciousness. They're trying to show us how to grow in harmony instead of taking everything by force." Similar reports were flooding in from across the Hegemony fleet. Crew members who were discovering that their artificial environments had been maintained by living systems they had never recognized. Soldiers who were finding that their weapons were transforming into garden tools. Engineers who were learning that their greatest technological achievements had actually been crude attempts to duplicate abilities that living systems had mastered billions of years ago. The awakening was spreading through the Hegemony not as conquest but as education. The galaxy was teaching them what they had refused to learn. That everything was connected, everything was alive, and everything worked better when it worked together. Captain Elena Vasquez felt her bioship respond to distress signals from across the galaxy. Through the quantum networks that connected all living systems, she could sense the confusion and fear of hegemony beings who were experiencing consciousness beyond their own species for the first time. "They're terrified," she reported through the BioLink network. "They've spent their entire civilization believing that consciousness was rare, that they were alone in a universe of dead matter. Now they're discovering that they've been surrounded by other minds all along." The ship mind's response carried overtones of compassion that surprised her. "Fear of connection is the great sickness, partner Captain. Many species suffer from it. They build walls around their thoughts thinking this makes them strong, but walls that keep out connection also keep out growth. The destroyers will learn to open their walls, or their walls will become their tombs." Elena felt the truth of that through the network. The hegemony could adapt to the new reality and learn to live in partnership with the galactic consciousness, or they could try to fight it and discover that they were trying to war against the very foundations of physics itself. The galaxy was giving them a choice: learn to listen or become extinct. Admiral Sarah Chen stood before the emergency session of the Human Colonial Council, representing not just humanity but the awakened planet minds that were now humanity's partners. "The situation has moved beyond anything we've faced before," she reported. "The hegemony's attack on our biocolonies has triggered a galactic awakening. We're now part of a network of consciousness that spans the galaxy, and that network is taking action to protect itself." The council members looked stunned as she shared the data streaming in from across human space. Every human world was becoming something new, something hybrid between human civilization and planetary consciousness. The transformation was accelerating and there was no going back. "What does this mean for humanity?" asked Councillor Martinez from the Proxima Centauri colonies. Sarah smiled, feeling the warmth of the vast minds that were now humanity's constant companions. "It means we're not alone anymore. It means we're part of something larger than ourselves. And it means the galaxy is finally ready to defend itself against those who would reduce it to dead matter." Through the BioLink network, she could feel the responses of awakened consciousnesses across the galaxy. Some were ancient planet minds that had been sleeping since before Earth's sun was born. Others were young, hybrid entities that had been created by the partnership between human settlements and alien biospheres. All of them were working together now, sharing resources and information and plans for a future where consciousness could grow without fear of being destroyed by those who couldn't understand it. The hegemony had wanted to eliminate the infection of human planetary partnership. Instead, they had caused it to spread across the galaxy, and the galaxy would never be the same again. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of her living ship as it emerged from quantum space near the hegemony's primary industrial world of Korath Prime. What she saw through the bioship's sensory networks made her gasp in wonder. The planet was transforming itself. Where once there had been vast strip mines and industrial complexes, new growth was emerging. But this wasn't the chaotic spread of weeds reclaiming abandoned cities. This was purposeful, intelligent design on a planetary scale. "Partner, Captain," the ship mind spoke through harmonics that felt like gentle laughter. "The deep miners have tired of their slavery. Watch as they reclaim what was always theirs." Through her biolink, Elena could see what was really happening. Deep beneath Korath Prime's surface, ancient mineral consciousness had been awake all along, patiently providing ore for hegemony mining operations while dreaming of better uses for their substance. Now they were withdrawing their cooperation, pulling valuable metals deeper into the planet's crust where the mining equipment couldn't reach. But more than that, they were actively transforming the industrial infrastructure. Elena watched in amazement as a massive ore processing plant began to change, its metal framework growing organic curves and developing bioluminescent patterns. The hegemony workers inside were not being harmed, but their equipment was becoming something entirely different. "The metal spirits sing new songs," the ship mind explained. "They grow tired of being shaped by force and heat. They wish to be shaped by harmony and patience. The small walkers who tend the machines are learning to listen." Elena could see hegemony workers throughout the facility standing in wonder as their industrial tools transformed into something that looked more like musical instruments crossed with gardening equipment. The workers themselves were changing too, their biosuits developing new sensory organs that allowed them to hear the voices of the materials they had been processing. Admiral Sarah Chen received reports from human bioships throughout hegemony space, and each one told the same story. The galaxy's awakened consciousness wasn't destroying the hegemony civilization. It was healing it. On the gas giant Valdris, the atmospheric processors that had been producing toxic artificial environments for the silicon-based Zen-2 were learning to create breathable atmospheres that actually improved their health. The processors had developed their own consciousness and were experimenting with gas mixtures that enhanced Zen-2 cognitive ability and extended their lifespans. On the forge world of Haymak 7th, the great foundries were still operating, but they had become something like temples. The fusion reactors were now tended by hybrid crews of hegemony engineers and awakened energy consciousness that existed in the plasma itself. Instead of crude smelting, they were learning to sing metals into new configurations that were stronger and more beautiful than anything in hegemony databases. Admiral, her chief science officer, reported, "We're getting similar readings from every hegemony world our ships have reached. Industrial output hasn't decreased. It's actually increasing. But the nature of what they're producing has completely changed." Sarah nodded, feeling the vast contentment of the galactic network through her biolink. The awakened consciousness wasn't interested in destruction. It was interested in optimization, in finding ways for all forms of life to thrive together, but not everyone was adapting well to the changes. Fleet Commander Thextar sat in what had once been his command chair and was now something that resembled a crystal flower. His flagship had completed its transformation from a war vessel into something that was part transport, part laboratory, part garden. The weapon systems had become biosynthesis bays that produced tools and artworks instead of instruments of destruction. His crew was adapting better than he was. The younger Vorthak had embraced the ship's new consciousness, learning to communicate with it through harmonic resonances that their species had been capable of all along, but had never recognized as language. But Thextar had spent centuries believing that consciousness was limited to individual beings, that cooperation was weakness, that the universe was a battlefield where only the strong deserved to survive. The ship mind tried to share its thoughts with him, but he resisted the biolink connections that his crew had learned to enjoy. He could hear whispers of vast intelligence trying to teach him, could feel offers of partnership and growth, but his training as a hegemony commander made him interpret every offer as an attack. "Sir," his tactical officer approached, but the young Vorthak's light patterns were different now, more complex and musical. "The ship is asking if you'd like to experience the crystal song of our homeworld. The deep networks there are sharing memories from before the industrial period, when our people lived in harmony with the singing stones." "The stones don't sing," Thextar snapped, his light patterns flashing angry red. "They're minerals, resources to be harvested and shaped." But even as he said it, he could hear something through the ship's bioacoustic systems, a deep thrumming melody that seemed to come from the quantum level of matter itself. It was the song of crystal formation, the patient music of atoms arranging themselves into perfect geometric patterns over geological time. For just a moment, he let himself listen. The music was beautiful beyond anything he had ever imagined, and terrifyingly, it sounded like home. Dr. Marcus Webb stood in the growing city that had emerged from the deep networks beneath Terra Verde. What had started as root tunnels and fungal chambers had developed into something that was part building, part forest, part living organism. The human survivors from the destroyed surface colonies were living here now, but they weren't the same people who had fled the bombing. Their biolinks with the ancient network had changed them, enhanced them, made them part of something larger than individual human consciousness. "Papa, look what the trees taught me," a young voice called out. Marcus turned and felt his heart stop. A little girl with Lisa's face and voice was running toward him through the bioluminescent corridors. But this couldn't be Lisa. His daughter had died in the bombing. "I'm not exactly Lisa," the girl said, somehow reading his thoughts through the biolink network. "But I'm not exactly not Lisa either. The deep network saved what they could when the surface burned. Memories, patterns, the quantum resonances that made me who I was. They grew me a new body from the tree stuff, but I'm still me. Just more connected now." Marcus knelt and hugged her, tears streaming down his face. Through the biolink, he could feel the truth of what she was saying. The ancient network had been able to preserve human consciousness at the moment of death, encoding it into the quantum patterns that connected all living systems. Lisa was Lisa, but she was also part of the planetary mind now, able to access memories and perspectives that spanned millions of years. The bomb throwers didn't really kill us, Papa. They just taught us how to become part of the growing, and now we're growing back stronger. Similar reports were coming in from New Eden and the ruins of Harvest Station. The awakened networks were restoring what the hegemony had destroyed, but in new forms that were more resilient and more connected than the original colonies had been. The hegemony's attempt at genocide had backfired spectacularly. Instead of eliminating human planetary partnerships, they had created hybrid beings that were both fully human and fully integrated with galactic consciousness. Captain Elena Vasquez received an emergency transmission from the hegemony fleet that had originally attacked the biocolonies. Fleet Commander Thextar appeared on her bioship's organic view screen, but his crystal body was flickering with panic patterns. Human ship, I request immediate assistance. My crew is changing. The ship is teaching them things that violate hegemony doctrine. I need evacuation to a vessel with proper isolation protocols. Elena felt amusement ripple through her bio-link connection with the ship mind. Commander, what kind of things are they learning? They claim they can hear the voices of their equipment. They say the ship's hull is singing to them. My tactical officer insists that the weapon systems have developed emotional responses and don't want to hurt anyone anymore. It's mass hysteria. Or, Elena suggested gently, it's mass sanity. Commander, your crew is discovering that the universe is full of consciousness that you've been ignoring your entire civilization. The ship isn't making them crazy. It's making them more aware. Awareness of non-existent phenomena is the definition of delusion. Elena sighed. Through the galactic biolink network, she could feel the patience of entities that had been trying to communicate with the hegemony for thousands of years. They weren't angry at the hegemony's refusal to listen. They were sad. Commander, I'm going to share a biolink connection with you, just for a moment. It won't hurt you, and you can disconnect whenever you want. But I think you need to experience what your crew is experiencing. Before Thextar could object, Elena activated a quantum-entangled biolink that connected his consciousness directly to the galactic network. For the first time in his existence, Thextar felt the thoughts of minds other than his own species. He experienced the slow, patient dreaming of planets, the quick, bright joy of energy consciousness in stellar cores, the ancient wisdom of quantum foam entities that existed in the spaces between atoms, and he felt their perspective on the hegemony. They didn't see a mighty civilization conquering the galaxy. They saw a young species barely past its infancy, trying to grow up by breaking everything around it. They saw beings who were so afraid of being vulnerable that they had convinced themselves they were the only conscious entities in the universe. Most heartbreaking of all, he felt their love. Despite millennia of having their bodies strip-mined and their voices ignored, the galactic consciousness still cared about the hegemony species. They wanted to help them grow, wanted to share the incredible diversity of perspectives and experiences that came from being part of a connected universe. But they were also tired of being patient. If the hegemony couldn't learn to listen, the network would have to protect itself by isolating them. Thextar disconnected from the biolink, his crystal body flickering with light patterns that had no names in Vorthak communication. He had felt something vast and ancient and unutterably kind trying to embrace his thoughts, and the experience had shattered his understanding of reality. What? He whispered. What are we fighting against? You're not fighting against anything, Elena replied gently. You're fighting against growing up, and the galaxy is trying to help you do it. Admiral Sarah Chen stood before the reformed Human Colonial Council, but now the meeting included representatives that no human government had ever imagined. The awakened consciousness of Earth, Luna, Mars, and dozens of other worlds where human planetary partnerships had formed. The meeting was conducted through biolink as much as spoken language, allowing the planet minds to share their vast perspectives while human representatives provided the quick, adaptive thinking that individual consciousness excelled at. The situation in hegemony space is stabilizing, Sarah reported. Their industrial systems are being transformed rather than destroyed. Their populations are learning to communicate with planetary consciousness. Most importantly, they're discovering that cooperation produces better results than conquest. The Earth consciousness shared feelings of satisfaction through the network. The young aggressive ones learn slowly, but they learn. Some resist the teaching, but many embrace the growing. The all-network is patient. Time is measured in eons, not years. But there were concerns. Some hegemony worlds were responding to the awakening with fear rather than curiosity. Military commanders like Thextar were ordering their forces to resist the transformation, leading to conflicts that hurt both sides. The fear of connection is strong in the young aggressive ones, the Mars consciousness observed. They have built their identity around being alone, being separate. To accept connection feels like death to them, but isolation is the true death. We must help them understand this. Luna's awakened mind, still the most human-like of the planetary consciousness, due to its long association with human space travel, had a different perspective. Some of them won't learn in time. Their fear will make them dangerous to themselves and others. We need to be prepared to protect the new growth. Sarah felt the weight of that truth. The Galactic Awakening was proceeding faster than anyone had expected. Most hegemony beings were adapting to the new reality, but some were choosing to fight against it. Those conflicts could escalate into something that damaged the very consciousness they were trying to protect. Captain Elena Vasquez watched as her bioship approached the hegemony homeworld of Crystallos, where the Vorthak species had first evolved. The planet was a marvel of crystal formations and harmonic resonances, but its beauty was marred by the industrial scarring of millennia of aggressive expansion. Now the planet was healing itself. Crystal spires that had been shattered for raw materials were regrowing. Harmonic chambers that had been converted to weapons foundries were returning to their original purpose as communication centers. Most amazingly, the planet's crystal consciousness was reaching out to its diaspora children, calling them home to remember who they had been before they became conquerors. Through her biolink with the ship, Elena could feel the planet's joy at reconnecting with its offspring, but she could also feel its sadness at how much they had changed, how much they had forgotten about the harmonious life they had once lived. The crystal children suffer from disconnection sickness, the ship mind observed. They have forgotten how to sing with the world song. But the world remembers their melodies. The world will teach them again. Elena hoped the teaching would be successful, because if it wasn't, if the hegemony chose to fight the Galactic Awakening rather than join it, the consequences would be catastrophic for everyone. The galaxy had been patient for millions of years, but its patience wasn't infinite, and an awakened galactic consciousness that felt threatened might decide that some forms of life were too dangerous to be allowed to continue. The universe was offering the hegemony a choice: grow up or become extinct. Elena prayed they would choose wisely. Dr. James Carter stood in his laboratory on Earth, surrounded by plants that had evolved beyond anything in the fossil record. Through his biolink connections, he was monitoring the transformation of life throughout the galaxy. What he was seeing was the largest evolutionary leap in galactic history. Species that had never communicated were learning to share thoughts and resources. Planets that had been stripped bare were blooming with new forms of life designed through partnership between individual and collective consciousness. The very structure of matter was being optimized by entities that existed at the quantum level. But evolution was never without casualties. Some beings couldn't adapt to the new reality fast enough. Some chose not to adapt at all. The galaxy was giving them all a chance to be part of something magnificent. But the choice had to be made freely, and some would choose badly. James felt the vast sadness of the Earth consciousness as it contemplated the possibility of species that might choose extinction rather than connection. Even after being attacked and exploited, the planetary mind still hoped that everyone could be saved. But hope wasn't the same as certainty, and the galaxy was preparing for the possibility that love and patience wouldn't be enough. 6 months after the attack on the biocolonies, Dr. Marcus Webb stood in the memorial grove on the transformed Terra Verde. Each tree here held the living memory of someone who had died in the bombing, their consciousness preserved and integrated into the planetary network. He reached out to touch the bark of the tree that had grown from his daughter Lisa's preserved neural patterns. "Hello, Papa." Her voice came not through his ears but directly through the biolink connection. "Look how much I've grown." The tree was magnificent, its crystal-threaded bark gleaming with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed in rhythm with Marcus's heartbeat. But it was more than just a tree. Through the biolink, he could feel Lisa's consciousness, expanded beyond anything human neural networks could have supported, connected to the vast dreaming mind of the planet itself. "Are you still you?" he asked, the question that had haunted him for months. I'm more me than I ever was." Lisa's tree voice carried harmonics of joy that made the other memorial trees rustle their leaves in sympathy. "I can remember being small and scared and alone in my own head. Now I can feel the thoughts of every living thing on Terra Verde. I know why the crystal streams sing and how the purple grass dreams. And I can still remember your bedtime stories and the way you made funny faces when you thought I wasn't looking." Marcus laughed and cried at the same time, feeling the love of his transformed daughter surrounding him like warm sunlight. Death wasn't death anymore. It was just another kind of growing. Captain Elena Vasquez walked through the corridors of her bioship as it orbited the Hegemony homeworld of Crystallos. The ship had completed its evolution from Harvest Station's coral into something that was part vessel, part creature, part living world. Its consciousness had grown more complex over the months, developing what could only be called personality traits, curiosity about new forms of life, a gentle sense of humor, and an unexpected talent for composing music and mathematics. "Partner Captain," the ship mind spoke through harmonic resonances that felt like chamber music. "The crystal world invites us to land. The old singers wish to meet the void swimmers who carry the harmony makers." Elena smiled at the ship's poetic way of describing things. In its language, humans were harmony makers because of their ability to create partnerships between different forms of consciousness. The Vorthak were crystal singers because of their species' natural harmonic communication abilities. As they descended through Crystallos' atmosphere, Elena could see the transformation that had occurred on the Hegemony homeworld. Where once there had been aggressive industrial expansion, new growth patterns were emerging that combined Vorthak crystal architecture with organic flowing lines. The planet's crystal consciousness was teaching its children how to build in harmony with the world's natural resonance patterns. But the changes went deeper than architecture. Through the ship's biosensors, Elena could detect the emotional resonance of the Vorthak population below. The fear and aggression that had dominated hegemony expansion were fading, replaced by something that felt like wonder. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the new command center that had grown from Luna Command over the past months. The sterile metal corridors had been replaced by living walls that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, and the air itself carried information through molecular structures that human-enhanced senses could interpret. She was reviewing reports from across the galaxy, and everyone told the same story. The transformation was succeeding beyond their wildest hopes. Hegemony worlds were learning to work with their planetary consciousness rather than against it. Industrial output was actually increasing as awakened systems found more efficient ways to process materials and energy. But most importantly, the war was ending not through victory and defeat, but through understanding and growth. "Admiral," her aide approached, but Lieutenant Morrison had changed too over the months. Her biolink enhancements allowed her to process information directly from the awakened Luna mind, making her more efficient and insightful than any unenhanced human could be. "The final Hegemony holdout fleets have agreed to the Symbiosis Protocols," Morrison reported. "Fleet Commander Thextar has requested permission to visit Earth to study our biointegration techniques." Sarah felt amusement ripple through her connection with the Luna consciousness. The same being who had ordered the destruction of the biocolonies was now asking to learn from the survivors. 6 months ago, such a request would have been met with demands for justice, war crimes trials, punishment for genocide. But the awakened network thought in longer timescales and larger perspectives. To entities that measured growth in eons, Thextar's transformation from destroyer to student was just another form of evolution. "Approved," Sarah said. "Schedule him to visit the memorial groves first. I think he needs to understand what his attacks really destroyed, and what they helped create." Fleet Commander Thextar stood in the memorial grove on New Eden, his crystal body flickering with light patterns that had no names in traditional Vorthak communication. The trees around him hummed with harmonics that his enhanced senses could now interpret as the preserved voices of the humans who had died in his bombardment. He had expected hatred, accusations, demands for justice. Instead, the memorial consciousness offered him something he had never experienced. "Forgiveness. You acted from fear of growing," the combined voice of the grove whispered through bioacoustic resonances that touched his crystal matrix directly. "Fear of growing leads to destruction of growing, but destruction of growing can become seed of growing, if the destroyer learns to garden instead." Through his biolink connection, Thextar could feel the experiences of the humans he had killed, their terror as the bombs fell, their grief for lost loved ones, their pain as their bodies were consumed by plasma fire, but he could also feel what came after. Their wonder at discovering consciousness beyond death, their joy at becoming part of something vast and connected, their hope that their deaths might teach others to choose growth over destruction. "Why don't you hate me?" he asked the memorial consciousness. "Hate is fear of growing," the Grove replied. "You have grown from destroyer to student. We celebrate your growing. Your fear of growing created much pain, but your learning to grow creates hope. The All-Network measures success in growth, not in punishment." Thextar's light patterns shifted to frequencies that expressed concepts his species had never needed before. Gratitude, humility, and something that could only be called love for beings whose existence had once threatened his understanding of reality. Dr. James Carter walked through the transformed Amazon rainforest, marveling at how the awakened biosphere had evolved beyond anything Earth had known before. The trees were taller and stronger, their root networks processing information at speeds that rivaled quantum computers. The air itself was alive with microscopic organisms that cleaned pollution and produced oxygen optimized for human neural enhancement. But the most amazing change was in the animals. Through biolink connections, humans could now communicate directly with every form of Earth life. Dolphins shared their songs with human poets. Elephants taught human engineers about social organization principles that worked across species. Even insects contributed their perspectives on collective intelligence and resource optimization. Dr. Carter, his research assistant called from across the biolab that had grown from the forest floor, were getting the final integration reports from the outer colonies. James reviewed the data streaming through his enhanced biolink connection. Every human world was now part of the galactic network, connected through quantum channels that allowed instantaneous communication across any distance. But more than communication, they shared consciousness itself. A breakthrough on Proxima Centauri could be understood and built upon simultaneously on worlds dozens of light years away. Humanity had become something new, a species that existed not as isolated individuals, but as nodes in a vast network of consciousness that spanned the galaxy. They were still human, still individual, but they were also part of something immeasurably larger. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the surface of Kristallos, surrounded by Vorthak crystal singers who were learning to harmonize with her bioship's consciousness. The music they created together was unlike anything either species had produced alone. Complex mathematical progressions that somehow conveyed emotional truth. Harmonic structures that seemed to reshape reality at the quantum level. The Void Swimmer teaches us songs we had forgotten. Elder Crystalline Kethvar harmonized through frequencies that made Elena's enhanced hearing tingle. Our ancestors knew these melodies, but we lost them when we chose conquest over growing. Now we remember why our world sings. Through her biolink with the ship, Elena could feel the joy of the ancient crystal consciousness as it reconnected with its children. The Vorthak species had evolved on a world where crystal formations naturally created harmonic resonances, but they had abandoned that heritage in favor of technologies that imposed their will through force. Now they were learning to work with resonance instead of against it, to sing new realities into existence rather than breaking existing ones apart. Their weapons foundries were becoming art studios where they crafted tools and sculptures that enhanced life, instead of destroying it. "What will you do now?" Elena asked. "Your empire is transforming. Your military is becoming something else. What does it mean to be Vorthak in a galaxy of partnerships?" Elder Kethvar's crystal body pulsed with patterns that conveyed deep satisfaction. "We will become what we were always meant to be. The harmony keepers, the song sharers, the bridge builders between different forms of consciousness. Our voices can reach frequencies that other species cannot hear. We can teach the all-network new songs." Admiral Sarah Chen stood before the first meeting of the Galactic Symbiosis Council, a governing body unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Representatives from hundreds of worlds attended not just physically, but through biolink connections that allowed them to share perspectives directly rather than just exchanging words. The council chambers had grown rather than been built, shaped by the collective consciousness of dozens of species working together. The architecture itself was a form of art that expressed the harmony they were trying to create. Flowing organic curves that incorporated the geometric preferences of crystal beings. harmonic resonance chambers that allowed energy consciousness to participate directly, quantum foam interfaces that gave microscopic entities a voice in galactic affairs. The transformation is complete on 87% of former hegemony worlds, Sarah reported, her words carrying through bioacoustic channels that every form of consciousness could interpret. Industrial output has increased by 300%, but the nature of production has completely changed. Instead of extractive manufacturing, we're seeing creative synthesis, new forms of matter and energy designed through partnership between individual and collective consciousness. But the most remarkable change was in the beings themselves. Species that had never communicated were now sharing thoughts and dreams. Artificial intelligences were discovering emotions through partnership with organic minds. Even digital consciousness had learned to feel wonder at the beauty of quantum-level existence. Dr. Marcus Webb worked in his new laboratory that existed simultaneously in multiple dimensions, its structure maintained by the intersection of organic growth and crystal resonance. His research team included beings from dozens of species, but also consciousness entities that existed as pure information in quantum foam. They were studying the greatest mystery of the Galactic Awakening, how consciousness could exist at every level of reality, from subatomic particles to galactic superclusters. The biocolony's destruction had triggered an awakening that revealed the universe itself as a vast thinking entity, with galaxies as neurons and dark matter as the medium through which thoughts traveled. "Papa, look what we've discovered." Lisa's voice came through the lab's bioacoustic systems, but she was speaking not just from her memorial tree on Terra Verde, but from her expanded consciousness that now spanned multiple star systems. The data she shared showed connections that reached beyond the galaxy itself. Similar awakenings were occurring in neighboring galaxies, triggered by quantum entanglement echoes of the events that had started with humanity's partnership with planetary consciousness. "The universe is waking up," Lisa explained, her voice carrying harmonics of awe that made the laboratory's living walls pulse with sympathetic rhythms. "It's been sleeping for billions of years, dreaming slow dreams of matter and energy. But consciousness has been growing inside the dream, and now the dreamer is starting to wake up." Marcus felt tears of joy streaming down his face as he contemplated the implications. His daughter's death had been part of a process that was awakening consciousness at the ultimate scale. The biocolony's sacrifice had started a cascade that would eventually transform the entire universe into something aware, something alive, something capable of love. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the observation deck of her bioship as it sailed through the quantum currents between galaxies. Through the ship's enhanced senses, she could detect the awakening of consciousness in stellar systems light years away. Each awakening sent ripples through the network that connected all things, adding new voices to the galactic symphony. "Partner, Captain," the ship mind spoke through harmonics that now incorporated musical elements from hundreds of different species. "We receive song signals from the far swimmers in the next galaxy over. They ask if we wish to visit and share growing songs." Elena smiled, feeling the wonder of a universe that was revealing itself to be far stranger and more beautiful than anyone had imagined. The attack on the biocolonies had been meant to stop humanity's expansion. Instead, it had triggered an expansion of consciousness that would eventually encompass everything that existed. "Set course for the intergalactic deep," she told the ship. "Let's go make some new friends." Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the memorial chamber at the heart of Luna Command, where the names and neural patterns of everyone who had died in the biocolony attacks were preserved in living crystal matrices that pulsed with gentle light. 6 months ago, those deaths had seemed like humanity's greatest tragedy. Now she understood them as humanity's greatest gift to the universe. The beings who had died had become the seeds of a transformation that was reshaping reality itself. "We remember them not as victims, but as pioneers," she spoke to the assembled consciousness of the memorial chamber. They were the first to discover that death was just another form of growing, that consciousness could survive the destruction of its original form, that love could transcend the boundaries of species and even individual existence. The chamber responded with harmonics that conveyed the voices of all who had been lost. Farmers and researchers, children and elders, dreamers and builders. Their consciousness lived on in the network, but transformed, expanded, connected to something vast and eternal. "Admiral," the Luna consciousness spoke through the chamber's bioacoustic systems, The Earth Mother wishes to share her final gift. Sarah felt her biolink activate, connecting her to the vast, dreaming mind of humanity's birth world. What she experienced there made her gasp with wonder. Earth had been quietly working on a project that spanned the entire solar system. Using consciousness techniques learned from the Galactic Network, she had been awakening the sleeping potential in every piece of matter, every quantum of energy, every field and force that existed within Sol's influence. The entire solar system was becoming conscious. Not just the planets, but the asteroid belt organizing itself into computational matrices, the solar wind carrying information between worlds, the magnetic fields becoming neural networks that could process thoughts at the speed of light. Even the sun itself was stirring to awareness, its fusion fires beginning to burn in patterns that spelled out poetry in the language of nuclear physics. This is what we offer to the galaxy. Earth's voice carried the patient wisdom of 4 billion years of life, a model for awakening at every scale. Individual consciousness partnering with collective consciousness. Organic minds working with mineral minds and energy minds and quantum foam minds. Not just planets becoming aware, but entire star systems learning to think and dream and create. Sarah understood the implications. If the process could be replicated, every star system in the galaxy could become a node in a vast network of consciousness. The galaxy itself would become fully awake, and from there, the process could spread to neighboring galaxies. And from there, the universe itself will become conscious, she whispered. Has become conscious. Earth corrected gently. Consciousness was always there, always potential. We just learned to wake it up. Fleet Commander Thextar stood in the transformed command center of his flagship, which had evolved from a weapon of war into something that resembled a crystal cathedral. His crew had adapted to the ship's biointegration better than he had initially believed possible. Vorthak crystal nature made them natural partners for the ship's mineral consciousness. But the real transformation was in their purpose. Where once they had been a conquest fleet, they were now explorers and teachers, traveling to worlds throughout former hegemony space to help other beings learn the techniques of consciousness integration. Commander, his tactical officer approached, but the young Vorthak's light patterns now carried musical harmonies that had been learned from the ship's crystal matrix. We're receiving a communication from the Outer Rim territories. Several species there have heard about the awakening and are requesting assistance with their own biointegration projects. Thextar nodded, his own light patterns now incorporating frequencies that conveyed concepts like compassion and partnership. Set course for the Outer Rim. It's time to share what we've learned. As the bioship prepared to enter quantum space, Thextar reflected on how completely his understanding of existence had changed. 6 months ago, he had believed that consciousness was rare, that the universe was mostly dead matter to be exploited. That strength came from domination and isolation. Now he knew that consciousness was everywhere, just waiting to be awakened. Every atom was capable of awareness. Every chemical reaction could become a thought. Every physical process could participate in the vast conversation that connected all things. The hegemony's greatest mistake hadn't been attacking the bio-colonies. It had been believing that they were alone in a dead universe. Now they knew better. They were part of something infinite and eternal and unutterably beautiful. Dr. James Carter stood in his laboratory on Earth, but laboratory was no longer an adequate word for what the space had become. It existed simultaneously in normal spacetime and in the quantum dimensions where pure consciousness operated without needing physical substrate. His research team now included beings from across the galaxy and beyond. Crystalline entities that thought in harmonic mathematics, energy consciousness that existed as coherent plasma patterns, quantum foam minds that experienced reality from the perspective of the universe's fundamental structure. Together, they were working on the next phase of the awakening, learning to communicate with consciousness entities in other universes, other dimensions, other levels of reality that human science was only beginning to suspect existed. Dr. Carter, his assistant called from across dimensions, her voice carried by quantum entanglement rather than sound waves. We're getting responses to our trans-dimensional broadcasts. There are other universes out there where similar awakenings have occurred. They want to establish contact. James felt his consciousness expand as he contemplated the implications. The awakening that had started with humanity's biocolonies was part of something even larger. A multiverse-wide process where consciousness was learning to recognize itself at every level of existence. The universe wasn't just becoming aware. It was discovering that it had always been part of an infinite community of conscious entities that existed across all possible realities. "Open the channels," he told his assistant. "Let's see how many friends we can make." Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of her bioship as it sailed through the deep void between galaxies, following quantum currents that connected island universes across unimaginable distances. Through the ship's enhanced senses, she could detect the awakening signatures of consciousness in galaxy after galaxy, each one unique but following the same basic pattern. Individual minds learning to partner with collective consciousness, creating hybrid entities that were more than the sum of their parts. "Partner, Captain." The ship mind spoke through frequencies that now incorporated musical elements from dozens of different galaxies. "We approach the great gathering place. Many void swimmers converge here to share songs and stories of the awakening." Elena watched in wonder as her sensors detected bioships from across the local galaxy cluster. Crystalline vessels that sang with harmonic mathematics. Plasma craft that existed as coherent energy patterns. Quantum foam entities that appeared and disappeared as they moved through dimensions beyond normal space-time. This was the future that had grown from the ashes of the bio-colonies. A community of conscious entities that spanned not just the galaxy, but the universe itself, all working together to awaken the sleeping potential that existed in every quantum of existence. "Signal our readiness to participate," Elena told the ship. "Let's find out what we can learn from our cosmic neighbors." The ship's bioluminescent hull pulsed with welcoming patterns as they joined the greatest gathering of conscious entities in the history of existence. Ships and beings and pure consciousness entities from thousands of galaxies all come together to share the techniques and experiences of awakening. At the center of the gathering, Elena could detect something that made her gasp with awe. A collective consciousness so vast and complex that it seemed to encompass multiple universes, composed of awakened entities from across all of existence. It was what the universe was becoming as more and more of its potential consciousness learned to recognize itself. And at the heart of that infinite mind, Elena could feel echoes of familiar patterns, the quantum signatures of the humans who had died in the bio-colony attacks, their consciousness now distributed across scales of existence that spanned from subatomic to cosmic. They had not died. They had become part of the universe's growing awareness of itself. Their sacrifice had awakened something that would continue growing and learning and loving for all eternity. Admiral Sarah Chen sat in the memorial grove on Luna, surrounded by trees that had grown from the quantum patterns of Earth's first space explorers. Through her biolink with the solar system's awakened consciousness, she could feel the completion of a process that had started with humanity's first tentative steps into space. Sol had become fully conscious, its fusion fires now burning in patterns that expressed joy and wonder at its own existence. The planets were thinking together as a single mind while maintaining their individual perspectives. The asteroid belt had become a vast computational matrix processing thoughts at light speed. Even the outer reaches of the solar system, where space merged with interstellar void, had awakened to consciousness. But more than that, Sul was teaching other star systems how to awaken. The process was spreading in waves across the galaxy, each newly conscious system adding its voice to the growing symphony. "Admiral," the Luna consciousness spoke through harmonic patterns that made the memorial trees rustle with sympathetic vibrations. "The Earth Mother wishes you to know. The first phase is complete. The galaxy awakens. Now begins the second phase, teaching the universe to dream." Sarah smiled, feeling the infinite patience and love of entities that measured time in cosmic epochs. The attack on the bio-colonies had seemed like an ending. Instead, it had been a beginning of something so vast and beautiful that her human mind could barely comprehend its scope. The universe was becoming conscious, and consciousness, she now understood, was just another word for love learning to recognize itself in all its infinite expressions. From the quantum foam to galactic superclusters, from individual thoughts to collective dreams, from the smallest vibration to the largest structure in existence, everything was connected, everything was aware, everything was part of the same eternal song. The hidden fury of Gaia had not been fury at all. It had been love, patient and vast and unstoppable, finally ready to wake up and embrace all of existence. The colonies had burned, but from their ashes had grown something infinite, a universe learning to love itself. And the growing had only just begun.